For 19 years, her daughter was a ghost, a face on a flyer, a gaping hole where a lifetime of memories should have been. A mother's search became her life, a quiet agony in the suburbs, clinging to a hope the world had forgotten. But a chance glance at a faded photograph, a unique mark in a stranger's eyes, ignited a spark across 2 decades and hundreds of miles. Prepare for a journey into the heart of a family's darkest secret, where the truth is more complex and heartbreaking than you can imagine. Could the girl in the picture truly be the child who was stolen? Watch the full story of the Unwritten Pages to uncover the stunning truth. Don't miss a moment of this powerful journey. Watch the video now and leave your comments below to share your thoughts. The late afternoon sun, heavy and golden, spilled through the bay window of the O'Connells' living room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny ephemeral fairies. It was the kind of light that softened edges, made the worn armchair by the fireplace look less tired, and cast a warm, almost ethereal glow on the Persian rug where 6-month-old Lily Claire O'Connell was currently engaged in a titanic struggle with her own 2 feet. Sarah O'Connell watched from the sofa, a soft smile playing on her lips. She was 32, her face open and kind, framed by practical, shoulder-length brown hair. Motherhood had etched faint lines of tiredness around her eyes, but they were overshadowed by a perpetual light of wonder and fierce love whenever she looked at her daughter. "Look at her go, Tom," she murmured, not taking her eyes off the tiny whirlwind of pink socks and flailing limbs. Tom O'Connell, a man built more for comfort than speed, with a friendly beard and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, chuckled from the doorway. He was a high school history teacher, his days filled with the echoes of past battles and forgotten empires, but his evenings were now ruled by the far more immediate and compelling present. Lily Claire. "She's a force of nature, that one," he agreed, leaning against the doorframe, a mug of lukewarm coffee forgotten in his hand. Their house, a tidy split level on Elm Street in the heart of Willow Creek, Ohio, was typical of the neighborhood. Well-manicured lawns rolled into one another, interrupted only by colorful flower beds and the occasional rogue sprinkler. It was the kind of place where kids rode bikes until dusk, where neighbors borrowed cups of sugar and actually returned them, and where the 4th of July parade was the highlight of the summer. They had moved here 2 years ago, drawn by the good schools and the comforting predictability of suburban life. It was, they had agreed, the perfect place to start a family. And Lily Claire was the perfect start. She was a sunny baby, all gummy smiles and infectious giggles. Her hair, a fine dusting of light brown, caught the sunlight like a halo. She had her mother's eyes, a clear, bright blue, but her father's stubborn chin. Every milestone was a triumph, celebrated with disproportionate joy. The first time she rolled over, the first time she truly laughed, the first time her tiny hand reached out and firmly grasped a finger. Each moment was a precious bead on the string of their new, beautiful life. "Did you pick up the extra formula?" Sarah asked, finally tearing her gaze away from Lily Claire to look at Tom. "Yep, and the new organic sweet potato puree. Apparently she's entering her gourmet phase." Tom grinned, pushing off the doorframe and coming into the room. He crossed to the rug and carefully lowered himself to the floor, groaning slightly. Lily Claire, momentarily distracted from her foot-finding mission, turned her head and spotted him. A wide, toothless grin spread across her face, and she let out a delighted squeal, pushing herself onto her elbows in an attempt to launch herself towards him. "Hey there, little one," Tom said, his voice soft and full of adoration. He scooped her up, burying his face in her soft neck, inhaling the sweet, milky scent that was uniquely hers. Lily Claire squealed again, her tiny hands tangling in his beard. Sarah watched them, her heart swelling with a feeling so profound it sometimes stole her breath. This was it. This was everything they had dreamed of and more. The quiet domesticity of their evenings filled with the sounds of Lily Claire's coos and gurgles, the shared smiles over her latest silly antic, The simple, undeniable fact of their small family unit. It was their perfect world, bathed in the warm, golden light of happiness. They didn't know then how fragile that light was, or how quickly darkness could fall. They only knew that, in this moment, on this ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Willow Creek, Ohio, their world was complete. Tuesday was usually Sarah's library day, a few precious hours of quiet surrounded by the comforting scent of old paper and polished wood, a brief respite from the beautiful, demanding chaos of new motherhood. She dropped Lily Claire off at Little Saplings, the daycare just 10 minutes from their house, a brightly painted building with a cheerful name and a stern-looking director everyone swore had a heart of gold. Lily Claire, nestled in her car seat, gave her usual sleepy 6-month-old passenger wave as Sarah buckled her in. "Be a good girl for Mrs. Davison, sweet pea," Sarah murmured, pressing a kiss to her daughter's soft forehead. Lily Claire just blinked, already halfway to dreamland. The library was calm, a world away. Sarah lost herself in the simple rhythm of shelving, the quiet hum of the computers, the hushed whispers of patrons. She turned her phone on silent, a habit born of not wanting to disrupt the tranquility, or, more honestly, not wanting her brief escape interrupted by the well-meaning but sometimes overwhelming demands of her new life. It was a small, selfish act she would replay in her mind 1,000,000 times in the years to come. The first missed call came just after lunch, then another, and another. She saw them when she finally checked her phone as she was packing up to leave, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. 3 missed calls, all from Little Saplings. Her mind immediately conjured a dozen benign scenarios: a minor fever, a forgotten Patsy, a need for more diapers. But as she pulled into the daycare parking lot, the knot exploded into a cold, sharp terror. 2 police cruisers, their lights flashing silent, ominous red and blue against the bright afternoon sun, were parked haphazardly near the entrance. A uniformed officer stood by the door, his face grim. Sarah's breath hitched. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking, the familiar weight of Lily Claire's diaper bag suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. She scrambled out of the car, her voice a desperate croak. "Excuse me. What's going on? I'm here for Lily Claire O'Connell." The officer turned to her, his expression softening with a professional, practiced sympathy that felt like a physical blow. "Mrs. O'Connell, could you come inside, please?" His voice was gentle, too gentle. Inside, the air was thick with a terrible, unnatural silence. The usual sounds of children's laughter and playful shouting were absent. Teachers hovered in small, pale groups, their faces etched with shock and fear. Mrs. Davison, her stern demeanor completely gone, was weeping quietly into a tissue, while another officer spoke to her in low tones. "Where is she? Where is Lily Claire?" Sarah's voice was rising, a frantic edge creeping in. A detective, older, with tired eyes and a rumpled suit, approached her. "Mrs. O'Connell, I'm Detective Harding. Can you tell me when you last saw your daughter?" "This morning, when I dropped her off, around 11:30. She was sleeping. What is happening?" Detective Harding took a deep breath, his gaze steady but full of dread. "Mrs. O'Connell, there's no easy way to say this. Lily Claire is missing." Missing. The word hung in the air, vast and empty. Sarah stared at him, her mind refusing to process the information. Missing? How could a baby, a 6-month-old baby, just be missing? "What do you mean, missing?" Tom burst through the door, his face pale, having rushed over from the school after Sarah's frantic, garbled phone call. "She's here, right? In the back? Is she sick?" Detective Harding repeated the terrible word, his voice firm this time. "Mr. O'Connell, your daughter is not here. We believe she was taken from the premises sometime this afternoon." The next hours were a blur of surreal horror. Questions came rapid fire, fragments of a nightmare. What was she wearing? Did you notice anything unusual? Was there anyone new working today? They learned the bare, brutal facts. A staff member, a young man named Gary, who had only been working there for a few weeks, had disappeared around the same time as Lily Clare. He had been trusted, seemed quiet, reliable. No one had seen him leave or seen him take her. The only trace was a back door found slightly ajar, something no one remembered leaving open. Police swarmed the daycare. Uniformed officers systematically searched every room, every closet, every corner, their movements efficient and grim. Detectives interviewed distraught staff members, their voices low and urgent. Crime scene investigators in their sterile suits meticulously dusted surfaces for fingerprints, cordoned off areas, their presence a stark, cold confirmation of the unthinkable. Sarah and Tom sat in a small empty classroom, the colorful alphabet posters and childish drawings on the walls a cruel mockery of their despair. They answered questions numbly, clinging to each other, the silence of the room deafening, broken only by Sarah's quiet, heartbroken sobs and Tom's ragged breaths. The police were doing everything right, they told themselves. They were professionals. They would find her. They had to. But as the initial frenzy of activity continued outside, as the golden afternoon light faded to twilight, a new, colder emotion began to set in, creeping into the edges of their shock and grief. Fear. A primal, suffocating fear that whispered a terrible truth. Their perfect world had been shattered, and the silence that had fallen was the sound of their daughter being stolen away, leaving behind only a gaping, unbearable emptiness. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months. The yellow ribbons that neighbors tied around the ancient oak trees on Elm Street faded and frayed, mirroring the hopes of Tom and Sarah O'Connell. Willow Creek, the idyllic suburb, transformed into a landscape of constant, agonizing reminders. Every park bench held the ghost of Lily Clare's laughter. Every stroller pushed by another parent was a stab to the heart. Every passing police car a fresh wave of nausea. The initial whirlwind of police activity eventually subsided. The intense search, the roadblocks, the television appeals, they all dwindled. Gary, the daycare worker, remained at large. His face, once just a blur in the background of Sarah's memories of drop-offs, became a horrifying, fixed image in her mind. A sketch artist worked with the daycare staff, creating a composite that stared out from flyers plastered on every lamppost and storefront. But leads ran cold. Tips that seemed promising dissolved into dead ends. The earth, it seemed, had simply swallowed their daughter whole. Grief is a corrosive force, and for Tom and Sarah, it worked its way into the very foundations of their marriage. The shared trauma that should have bound them together instead drove a wedge between them. Sarah became consumed by the search, a relentless, tireless advocate for her missing daughter. She organized search parties, hounded the police for updates, created websites and social media pages dedicated to Lily Clare. She wouldn't stop moving, as if stillness would allow the full weight of her loss to crush her. Her days were a blur of activity, her nights haunted by images of Lily Clare's face. Tom's grief was quieter, more internalized. He retreated into himself, the easygoing man replaced by a hollowed-out shell. He went through the motions of teaching, but the spark was gone. He couldn't bear to be in their once happy home, now a mausoleum of cherished memories and painful absences. Every tiny sock found under the sofa, every unused baby toy, every empty space where her crib used to be, it was a fresh wound. He watched Sarah's frantic energy with a mixture of admiration and weary despair. He couldn't join her in her relentless pursuit. He felt paralyzed by his own pain. The argument started subtly, born of exhaustion and frayed nerves. Sarah accused him of not caring enough, of moving on. Tom accused her of living in the past, of destroying them both with her obsession. Words, sharp and cruel, were exchanged, words that couldn't be unsaid. The love was still there, buried deep beneath layers of pain and resentment, but they couldn't reach it. The shared silence in their home became a chasm. After 5 years, Tom moved out. It was a quiet, heartbreaking separation, filled with apologies and tears, but ultimately an inevitability. "I can't, Sarah," he had said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I can't breathe in this house anymore. It's killing me." Sarah, though devastated, understood. She was trapped in the past, and he needed to find a way to live in the present, however painful that present was. She stayed in the house on Elm Street, the silent rooms a testament to the life they had lost. Her job at the library became her sanctuary, a place where the quiet routine offered a semblance of control in a world that felt utterly out of control. The years blurred. Anniversaries of the abduction came and went, each one a fresh wave of grief, a public acknowledgement of her private, unending nightmare. The flyers with Lily Claire's face aged, the colors fading, the paper peeling from telephone poles, but Sarah never stopped replacing them. She attended support groups for parents of missing children, finding solace in the shared, unspoken understanding of others who lived with the same gaping wound. She learned about cold cases, about the long, agonizing waits, about the flicker of hope that somehow, miraculously, sometimes against all odds, children were found years later. She clung to that hope like a life raft in a turbulent sea. 10 years passed, then 15. The world changed. Technology advanced. Missing person databases became more sophisticated, DNA testing more refined. But still, nothing. Gary remained a ghost. Lily Claire remained a missing child, her face forever frozen in the last photograph they had of her, a smiling baby with bright blue eyes. Sarah was now in her late 40s. Her hair had streaks of gray, her face deeply etched with the lines of sorrow and time. Tom had remarried, built a new life, though a quiet sadness still lingered in his eyes whenever Lily Claire was mentioned. They spoke occasionally, a fragile connection based on their shared, unimaginable loss. 18 years, it was a lifetime of birthdays missed, of first days of school, of scraped knees and bedtime stories. 18 years of wondering, of imagining, of torturing herself with possibilities. Where was Lily Claire? Was she safe? Was she happy? Did she even know her name wasn't always the one she was called? The pain never truly went away. It simply became a dull ache that was a constant companion. She had learned to live with the silence, the empty space where her daughter should be. She had learned to carry her grief, a heavy, invisible burden, but she had never, not for 1 second, given up hope. Not completely, because in the darkest corners of her heart a tiny flicker still remained, a stubborn refusal to believe that Lily Claire was gone forever. And sometimes, in the quiet of the library, or on a lonely evening in her empty house, she would close her eyes and picture that bright golden light and the sound of a baby's laughter, just daring herself to remember what perfect felt like. 19 years had passed since Lily Claire O'Connell vanished from Little Sapling's daycare. 19 years of hollowed-out holidays of birthdays marked by an ache in the chest, of a silence that still screamed in the quiet moments. In that time, Lily Claire had grown somewhere into a young woman. Her name now was Emily Carter. She lived in a small town nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina, a place where life moved at a slower pace, dictated by the rhythm of the seasons and the demands of the land. Emily was 20, her 21st birthday just a few months away. She worked at the local diner, slinging hash and pouring coffee with an easy smile and a quiet efficiency. Her life was simple, predictable. She had a small apartment above the hardware store, a beat-up truck that sometimes started on the first try, and a handful of friends she'd known since grade school. She had been raised by the Carters, a kind, God-fearing couple who owned a small farm on the outskirts of town. They had taken her in as a baby, a blessing, they called her, though the details of how she came to them were always a little vague, shrouded in hushed tones and incomplete stories about troubled times and doing what was right. Emily loved them. They were the only parents she had ever known. Her childhood had been unremarkable in the best possible way, filled with school plays, summer evenings chasing fireflies, and the comforting, constant presence of the mountains in the distance. Emily was striking, though she didn't seem to know it. She had a cascade of sun-kissed brown hair that she usually pulled back in a ponytail, and eyes the color of a clear summer sky. Eyes that held a depth that hinted at a story she didn't know herself. But it was the mark near her left eye that truly set her apart. A birthmark, a delicate, violet-hued shape that resembled, if you looked at it just right, the unfurling petals of a lotus blossom. It was a unique, beautiful imperfection that she had long since stopped noticing, as accustomed to it as she was to the freckles scattered across her nose. Life in the mountains was mostly private, insulated from the wider world. But once a year, the county held its annual Fall Harvest Festival, a sprawling event with pie-baking contests, tractor pulls, and local craft vendors. It was a big deal, drawing crowds for miles around, a chance for the community to come together and celebrate the bounty of the harvest. This year, the local newspaper, the Mountain Chronicle, decided to do a special feature on the people who made the festival happen: the farmers, the bakers, the artisans. A young photographer named Ben, fresh out of college and eager to make a name for himself, was assigned the task. He spent days wandering through the festival, capturing candid shots of people laughing, working, and celebrating. On the second day of the festival, Ben stopped by the diner for lunch. Emily was behind the counter, her movements efficient as she juggled orders and refilled coffee cups. The sunlight streaming through the window caught her face, illuminating the subtle, beautiful detail of the birthmark. Ben, with his photographer's eye, was instantly captivated. It wasn't just the mark. It was the quiet strength in her eyes, the natural grace in her movements. She wasn't posing, she was just being. He raised his camera, asked if she minded, and took a single shot. Emily barely noticed. She was used to people looking, sometimes staring at her birthmark. She just smiled, a genuine, open smile, and went back to her work. A week later, the Mountain Chronicle hit the newsstands. The Fall Harvest Festival feature was the cover story, and on the cover, in a stunning close-up shot, was Emily Carter. The headline read, "Faces of the Harvest, Community, and Tradition in the Blue Ridge." Her eyes, clear and bright, looked out at the reader, and the distinctive violet lotus blossom near her left eye was clearly visible, a unique and unforgettable mark. In a quiet suburb hundreds of miles away, a woman sat in a library, her life a tapestry of routine and quiet grief. She picked up a copy of the local paper, her eyes scanning the headlines, not expecting to see anything that would change her world. And then she saw the cover. Her breath hitched. Her hand trembled as she brought the paper closer, her eyes fixed on the face staring back at her. The eyes were older, the face more mature, but the mark was unmistakable. A cold certainty, sharp and sudden, pierced through the long-held sorrow. It couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't be. Her heart, dormant for so long, began to pound with a fierce, terrifying, exhilarating hope. Emily Carter. The name beneath the photo was unfamiliar, but the face was Lily Clare's. The world, for Sarah O'Connell, had just tilted on its axis. Sarah O'Connell folded the last of the library's returned paperbacks. The familiar scent of aged paper, a comforting constant in her otherwise unpredictable world. 19 years. It had been 19 years since the silence had descended, since Lily Clare had been swallowed by the unknown. 19 years of carrying the weight of that day, of living a life divided into before and after. She had long ago stopped expecting miracles. Hope was a dangerous thing, a flickering candle that the slightest breath of reality could extinguish. It was safer in the quiet grayness of resignation. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where the clock on the wall seemed to tick louder than usual, where the drone of the fluorescent lights felt almost deafening. Sarah decided to take a short break, wandering towards the small rack where the local newspapers and magazines were displayed. She rarely lingered here. The national news was too full of distant tragedies. The local news too often a reminder of the life that had continued without them in Willow Creek. But today, something drew her eye. A small, folded newspaper, the Mountain Chronicle, likely left behind by a patron passing through town. The headline was generic, "Faces of the Harvest." But it was the image below that froze her. It was a young woman, mid-20s perhaps. Her hair was a warm brown, catching the light. She had a friendly, open face, the kind you might see in any small-town diner, which Sarah would later learn was exactly where the photo was taken. But it wasn't the smile, or the eyes, or the dusting of freckles that stopped Sarah's heart mid-beat. It was the mark. Near her left eye, a splash of color against her skin, a delicate, violet-hued shape. Sarah's breath hitched, a sharp, painful gasp that echoed in the hushed library. Her fingers, usually so steady and precise when handling fragile books, trembled as she reached for the paper, snatching it from the rack. She brought it closer, her eyes blurring with sudden, overwhelming emotion. It was the same. The exact same shape. The unfurling petals of a lotus blossom. Lily Clare's birthmark. The one she had traced a million times with her fingertip when her daughter was a baby. The one she had described over and over to police officers, to sketch artists, to anyone who would listen. The unique, unmistakable mark that was as much a part of Lily Clare as her name. The world outside the library faded away. The quiet hum, the ticking clock, the rows of books, they all disappeared. There was only the newspaper in her hands and the face on the cover. Emily Carter, the caption read, age 20. 20, Lily Clare would be 19 or 20 now. A wave of dizziness washed over Sarah. She gripped the edge of the nearby bookshelf to steady herself, her knuckles white. It couldn't be. After all this time, after all the dead ends, the false hopes, the crushing disappointments, it couldn't be real. Her mind, conditioned by years of grief to protect itself from further pain, immediately offered rational explanations. A coincidence, a similar mark. It happened. But her heart, that stubborn, fragile organ that had continued to beat even in the face of unimaginable loss, refused to listen to reason. It pounded against her ribs, a frantic, joyful drumbeat that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The face on the cover was older, yes, more mature, but the eyes, those clear, bright blue eyes, were they hers? And the birthmark? It was identical. Tears, hot and sudden, streamed down Sarah's face. She didn't try to stop them. They were tears of shock, of disbelief, of a fragile, terrifying hope that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in nearly 2 decades. 19 years of silence, broken by the sound of a single, powerful possibility. Emily Carter. Was it possible? Was it truly possible? She looked at the photo again, her gaze tracing the outline of the familiar mark. It was like looking into the face of a ghost of the future she had been denied. A ghost that suddenly felt incredibly, undeniably real. The grayness of resignation lifted, replaced by a blinding golden light. The light of hope. And in that light, Sarah O'Connell saw not just a photograph, but the possibility of a reunion, a chance to finally break the silence that had defined her life for 19 long years. The abyss hadn't swallowed Lily Clare whole, after all. Somewhere, out there, a spark remained, and Sarah, with trembling hands and a pounding heart, was about to follow it. The newspaper, still clutched in Sarah's trembling hands, felt impossibly heavy. The quiet of the library seemed to press in on her, a stark contrast to the tempest raging within. Emily Carter, 20 years old, living in North Carolina. The birthmark. It was too much to process, too much to hope for. She retreated to the staff room, a small, windowless space smelling faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. She needed a moment, a quiet corner to breathe and to think. Spreading the newspaper flat on the worn Formica table, she stared at the image of Emily, her eyes scanning every detail of the face, searching for any other flicker of recognition, any echo of the baby she had lost. There were subtle similarities to Tom around the jawline, a curve to the cheekbone that hinted at a shared genetic blueprint. But it was the birthmark that remained the undeniable, screaming piece of evidence. How could she find her? How could she be sure? The Mountain Chronicle was a local paper, likely with a small circulation. Contacting the newspaper seemed the most direct route. She found the masthead, scanning for a phone number or email address for the photography department, or perhaps the photographer himself, Ben. Her fingers fumbled with her phone, the screen suddenly too bright, the numbers a blur. She dialed the number listed for the Mountain Chronicle. A cheerful voice answered, "Mountain Chronicle, how can I help you?" "Yes, I'm calling about a photo in your latest issue," Sarah stammered, her voice tight with emotion. "The cover photo of the young woman, Emily Carter." "Oh yes, wasn't that a lovely shot? Ben really captured the spirit of the festival." The cheerful voice was oblivious to the earthquake it was triggering. "The photographer, Ben, could I speak to him, please? Or get his contact information?" There was a pause. "I'm sorry, we can't give out personal contact information for our staff. Is there something I can help you with?" Sarah hesitated. How much could she say? How much should she say over the phone to a stranger? It's about the young woman in the photo. Emily Carter. There's a possibility, a small possibility, that she might be my daughter. My daughter was abducted almost 20 years ago." The cheerfulness on the other end of the line evaporated, replaced by a stunned silence. Oh my. I don't know what to say. I can pass a message along to Ben, but... Please, Sarah's voice was pleading now. Please just tell him that Sarah O'Connell from Ohio saw the photo, and I need to talk to him. It's urgent. Life or death urgent. She gave her phone number, her voice trembling. She hung up, the silence of the staff room rushing back in. Passing a message along? It wasn't enough. Every second felt precious, every delay unbearable. What if Emily Carter moved? What if the paper didn't pass along the message? What if Ben didn't call? She knew what she had to do. She needed help. Real help. She thought of Detective Harding, the kind, weary detective who had been assigned to Lily Claire's case all those years ago. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Tom had moved out and the case had officially gone cold. Would he even remember her? Would he dismiss this as another desperate lead from a grieving mother? There were also private investigators, specialists in missing persons, some of whom focused specifically on cold cases. She had researched them endlessly in the early years, poring over websites and success stories, but had never been able to afford their exorbitant fees. Now, the thought resurfaced. Maybe one of them would take the case, would see the undeniable evidence in that birthmark. She pulled out her phone again, scrolling through her contacts. Detective Harding's number was still there, a relic of a past life. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Could she handle the potential disappointment in his voice, the polite skepticism? Then she remembered the support groups, the network of parents who understood. They had recommended resources, shared names of people who had helped them navigate the labyrinthine world of missing persons cases. One name surfaced in her mind. Robert Vance, a retired detective turned private investigator who had a reputation for taking on cold cases pro bono or at a significantly reduced fee, driven by his own past experience. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Sarah bypassed Harding's number. She searched her email for the old contact list from the support group. She found it, her eyes scanning the names until she landed on his. Robert Vance, missing persons specialist, based in Atlanta but known to travel. This felt right, a detective who chose to help, who understood the long shadow cast by a missing child. With a surge of renewed determination, a feeling she hadn't felt in almost 2 decades, Sarah dialed the number. It was a long shot, she knew, but after 19 years of living in the silence, a long shot was more than enough. It was a lifeline. Robert Vance's office was exactly what Sarah had expected. Cluttered, lived in, and radiating an air of quiet competence. Maps dotted the walls, marked with pins and intersecting lines. Stacks of files teetered on every surface. The air smelled faintly of old paper and lukewarm coffee. Vance himself was a man in his late 60s, lean and sharp-eyed with a handshake that was firm and reassuring. He listened intently as Sarah, her voice sometimes trembling but her resolve unwavering, recounted the story of Lily Claire's abduction, the 19 years of searching, and the shocking discovery on the cover of the Mountain Chronicle. He studied the newspaper photo Sarah had brought, his gaze lingering on Emily's face, then on the distinctive birthmark. He compared it to the faded, precious photographs Sarah had of Lily Claire as a baby. A long silence hung in the air after Sarah finished speaking. "Mrs. O'Connell," Vance finally said, his voice a low rumble, "I've seen a lot of things in my line of work. A lot of heartbreak, and a lot of false leads, but this—" He tapped the newspaper with a fingernail. "This is compelling." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "You believe me?" "I believe this warrants a serious investigation," Vance corrected, his expression serious. "That birthmark, it's unique. Too unique to be easily dismissed as coincidence. And the age, it aligns." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant for a moment. 19 years is a long time. Memories fade, records get lost, people move on. If this young woman is your daughter, she's lived her entire life believing she's someone else. That adds layers of complexity you can't even imagine. He took a sip of his coffee, then met Sarah's gaze. "If I take this on, I go where the leads take me, no guarantees. It could still be a dead end. Are you prepared for that?" "I've been living with dead ends for 19 years, Mr. Vance," Sarah said, a steely edge in her voice. "I have to know." Vance nodded slowly. "All right, Mrs. O'Connell, I'll take your case." The investigation began methodically, a stark contrast to the frantic energy of those first few weeks after the abduction. Vance started by contacting the Mountain Chronicle. Ben, the photographer, was initially hesitant to give out information about a subject citing privacy concerns. But Vance, using his old detective instincts and a carefully worded explanation about a potential missing person case, managed to convince him to share what little he knew about Emily Carter and the family she was with at the festival. Ben provided the Carters' names, George and Martha Carter, and a general idea of where their farm was located. Next, Vance delved into databases, pulling up everything he could find on George and Martha Carter. Public records were a start: property deeds, tax records, voter registration. They painted a picture of a long-established family in the area, quiet and seemingly unremarkable. There were no red flags, no criminal records, nothing immediately suspicious. He then turned his attention to Emily. Finding information on someone who didn't officially exist before they appeared in a specific location could be challenging. He searched school records in the area around the Carters' farm, looking for a student matching Emily's age and description who might have enrolled around 19 years ago. He scoured local news archives from that time, looking for any mention of the Carters taking in a child, any unusual events, anything that might shed light on how Emily came to be with them. He also began to build a timeline, cross-referencing the date of Lily Claire's abduction with any significant events in the Carters' lives around that period. Had they had visitors? Had they traveled? Had there been any unexplained income or expenses? Meanwhile, Sarah, at Vance's instruction, started quietly reaching out to members of the online support group who lived closer to North Carolina. She shared the newspaper article, the photo, and the striking resemblance of the birthmark, asking if anyone had ever heard of the Carters or the specific area where they lived. The power of the Internet, of a community bound by shared loss, was a resource Vance intended to use. The first few days yielded little. The Carters' lives seemed frustratingly normal. Emily Carter, according to the limited public information available, was simply a young woman working at a diner, living a quiet life in a small town. It was almost too normal. But Vance knew that sometimes the most ordinary surfaces could hide the deepest secrets. He instructed Sarah to send him high-resolution scans of every photo she had of Lily Claire, focusing particularly on the birthmark, its size, its exact shape, its position relative to her eye. He needed to be able to compare them with the utmost precision. As Vance worked from his cluttered office, a map of North Carolina spread out before him. Sarah waited, a knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. Every phone call, every email notification sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. The initial surge of exhilarating hope had settled into a tense, nerve-wracking vigilance. The investigation had begun. The threads were being traced, but where they would lead and what they would unravel remained a terrifying unknown. The quiet life Emily Carter was living was a stark contrast to the storm that was gathering, a storm that threatened to break over her and over everyone involved very soon. Robert Vance worked with the quiet persistence of a craftsman, chipping away at the seemingly solid facade of the Carter family's life. The initial background checks had yielded little. A few minor traffic violations, standard property records. But Vance knew that life's deepest secrets rarely appeared on official documents. He began to dig deeper, using old-fashioned legwork and a network of contacts built over decades in law enforcement. He traveled to the small town in the Blue Ridge Mountains. He didn't announce himself as a private investigator looking into a potential abduction. Instead, he presented himself as a researcher interested in long-standing local families and their histories, a plausible cover in a region that valued tradition and privacy. He spent his days at the county courthouse, poring over old records, birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses, even local newspaper archives dating back 20 years. It was in these dusty archives that the first subtle inconsistencies began to appear. According to the records, George and Martha Carter had never officially adopted a child. There was no record of a legal adoption proceeding. While informal guardianships or private arrangements weren't unheard of in rural areas, it was unusual for a child to be raised from infancy without any legal documentation of their custody. He also found a brief, almost overlooked article in the Mountain Chronicle from about 19 years prior, detailing a local fundraising drive for a young couple who had suffered a tragedy. The details were sparse, but it mentioned a fire that had destroyed a small, isolated cabin deep in the mountains, resulting in the deaths of the couple. The article didn't name them, but it stuck in Vance's mind. Was there a connection? Meanwhile, Sarah's quiet inquiries through the online support group began to yield results. One member, a woman named Brenda, who lived about an hour from the Carters' town, responded with a tentative message. She didn't know the Carters well, but she remembered hearing snippets of local gossip years ago. Something about a baby who just appeared one day. The details were hazy, unsubstantiated rumors about a relative who couldn't cope, or perhaps something more complex. Gossip wasn't proof, but it added another layer to the growing sense of unease surrounding Emily's arrival in the Carter household. Vance also spent time at the local diner where Emily worked, observing her from a distance. He watched her interact with the customers, her easy smile, her confident movements. He saw the quiet affection between her and the Carters when they occasionally came in for a meal. On the surface, it looked like a loving family unit. But Vance was looking for the cracks, the subtle signs that something wasn't quite right. He managed to strike up a conversation with a couple of the older locals, longtime residents who had seen just about everything. He steered the conversation casually towards the Carter family, asking about their farm, how long they'd been in the area. They spoke of George and Martha with respect, describing them as hard-working and devout. But when he casually mentioned Emily, asking if she was their biological daughter, there was a brief, almost imperceptible hesitation. "Emily? No, she ain't theirs by blood," one old man said, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "They took her in when she was just a mite. Sad business, that was. Didn't rightly hear all the details. Folks kept quiet about it." "Sad business?" Vance prompted gently. The old man shrugged. "Just, folks said it was a bad situation she came from. Best not to pry, you know?" The reluctance to elaborate was telling. It suggested a story that was either painful, shameful, or perhaps even hidden. Vance pressed no further, but the conversation confirmed his suspicion. Emily had not come to the Carters through conventional means. He requested the police reports from the Willow Creek Police Department regarding Lily Clare's abduction, reviewing them with a fresh pair of eyes. He paid close attention to the details about Gary, the missing daycare worker. His background, his known associates, any family connections. The report mentioned he was from a rural area, but the specific location was vague. It also mentioned a distant relative, a cousin perhaps, but the lead had never panned out. As Vance compiled the information, the lack of adoption records, the local gossip about a baby who just appeared, the cryptic mention of a sad business, the possibility of a connection to a fire, and the sparse details about Gary's background, a picture began to form. It was still incomplete, full of missing pieces and unanswered questions, but the outline was becoming clearer. The Carters weren't just a kind couple who had taken in a child out of the goodness of their hearts. There was something more, something hidden beneath the surface of their quiet lives. And that something, Vance suspected, was directly connected to a missing baby girl from Ohio and a heartbroken mother who had searched for 19 long years. The threads were beginning to connect, weaving a darker, more intricate pattern than anyone had initially imagined. Robert Vance sat in his temporary office, a sparsely furnished room in a small-town motel, the air conditioning unit rattling a steady rhythm against the quiet of the afternoon. Spread before him were the fruits of his initial digging, printouts of public records, notes from his conversations with locals, and, most importantly, the dusty, digitized files from the Willow Creek Police Department's cold case unit, the investigation into the disappearance of Lily Clare O'Connell. He'd spent days poring over the original police work, looking for anything that might have been overlooked, any detail that, when viewed through the lens of Emily Carter's existence, might suddenly make sense. The original investigation had been thorough, by small-town standards, but limited by resources and the sudden evaporation of their primary suspect, Gary. He reread the section on Gary, the daycare worker. Gary Hemlock, the report stated. Age 24 at the time of the abduction. Transient background, few local ties. He'd given the daycare a local address, a room in a boarding house, but he'd only been there a few weeks. The report mentioned attempts to locate his family, distant relatives in a rural part of the state, but the leads had gone nowhere. The name of one relative, a cousin, was mentioned briefly, Susan Pledger. The name sparked a flicker of recognition in Vance's mind, a name he'd encountered recently, though he couldn't immediately place it. He cross-referenced the date of Lily Clare's abduction, October 17th. Then he looked at the local newspaper archives he'd pulled from the mountain town. The article about the fatal cabin fire was dated October 20th, just 3 days after the abduction. The cabin, located deep in a remote, unincorporated area, had been completely destroyed. The names of the victims were listed as John and Mary Doe, pending positive identification, which, the article noted, was made difficult by the severity of the fire. The cause was suspected to be a faulty wood-burning stove. Vance leaned back in his chair, a prickle of unease running down his spine. 3 days, a missing abductor, possibly from a rural area, and a fatal fire in a remote cabin 3 days later. Coincidence? Maybe, but in Vance's experience, coincidences in missing persons cases were rare. He pulled up a map of the region, cross-referencing the location of the fire with the general area where locals said the Carter's farm was located, and the vague references to where Gary Hemlock's relatives might be. The locations weren't identical, but they were all within the same broader mountainous region. He remembered the gossip Sarah had relayed from the support group contact. Rumors about a baby who just appeared at the Carter's farm around the same time as the sad business. The Carters were religious, well respected. It was possible they had taken in a child orphaned by a tragedy, perhaps even kept it quiet to avoid scrutiny or bureaucracy. But what if the sad business wasn't just a fire? What if it was something more? What if the fire was a cover-up? He went back to the police report on Lily Clare's abduction. He focused on the witness statements from the daycare staff. Several mentioned seeing Gary Hemlock near the back exit shortly before Lily Clare was discovered missing. One younger staff member recalled him acting nervous, repeatedly checking his watch and looking out the window. Another mentioned overhearing him on the phone a few days prior, speaking in hushed tones about needing to take care of something and getting away. Then Vance found it. A small, almost illegible note in the margin of Gary Hemlock's file, a detail that had likely been dismissed as insignificant at the time. A partial license plate number, jotted down by a vigilant neighbor who had seen a car parked suspiciously near the daycare on the morning of the abduction, a car that wasn't usually there. The neighbor hadn't thought much of it until they heard about the missing child. The number was incomplete, only 3 letters and 2 numbers. 3EZ, 7. Vance's mind raced. He needed to know who owned a car with that license plate fragment in this region around the time of the abduction. He needed to find out who lived in that burned-down cabin. He needed to find out more about Gary Hemlock's relatives, particularly that cousin, Susan Pledger. The name Pledger, where had he heard that name recently? He mentally scrolled through the names he'd encountered in the mountain town. The local tavern. Miller's Tavern. The owner's son, the bartender, Bran Pledger. A chill went down Vance's spine. Pledger. It could be a common name, of course, but in a remote area, among distant relatives of a man who had disappeared the same day a baby went missing. A baby who might have resurfaced in that very same region. It felt like more than a coincidence. He picked up the phone, dialing the number for the Willow Creek Police Department. He asked to speak to Detective Harding, or whoever was now in charge of the Lily Clare O'Connell cold case. He had information he would tell them. Information that connected a 19-year-old abduction in Ohio to a 20-year-old fire in North Carolina, a missing daycare worker, a family who took in a baby with no records, and a name, Pledger, that echoed in the mountains. The pattern was emerging from the shadows, a dark, disturbing tapestry woven from secrets and lies, leading him closer and closer to the truth of what happened to Lily Clare O'Connell. The quiet life of Emily Carter was about to be shattered. The meeting was arranged with agonizing care, mediated by Robert Vance. He had contacted the local police in Emily's town, presenting his findings with a calm, irrefutable logic that transcended the initial skepticism of a cold case. The birthmark, the timeline, the inconsistencies in the Carter's story, the potential connection to Gary Hemlock. It was enough to warrant official involvement. The police had cautiously approached the Carters and Emily. The revelation had understandably thrown their quiet lives into turmoil. A DNA test was the irrefutable proof. The results came back positive. A match. Emily Carter was, beyond any shadow of a doubt, Lily Clare O'Connell. Now came the hardest part, the meeting. It was decided it would take place at the police station, a neutral, if sterile, environment. Sarah and Tom, who had traveled together from Ohio, a tense, silent truce hanging between them, sat in a small interview room, the air thick with anticipation and decades of unspoken grief. Tom was thinner now, his beard mostly gray, the lines on his face etched deeper by time and sorrow. But the sadness in his eyes was instantly recognizable to Sarah. They were united again, if only for this one terrifying moment. A detective opened the door. "She's ready," he said softly. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird desperate to escape. Her palms were slick with sweat. Tom reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly firm. They stood as Emily walked in. She wasn't the baby in the faded photographs, of course. The cherubic roundness was gone, replaced by the defined cheekbones and quiet strength Sarah had seen in the newspaper photo. Her hair was pulled back, her blue eyes wide and uncertain. The birthmark, the beautiful, heartbreaking lotus blossom, was exactly as Sarah remembered. Emily was beautiful, a young woman on the cusp of her life, a life that had been built on a foundation of secrets she hadn't known existed. Behind her stood Martha Carter, her face pale and drawn, her arm protectively around Emily's shoulders. George Carter hovered in the doorway, his usual steady demeanor replaced by a nervous unease. The two worlds collided in the small room, the air crackling with unspoken history and raw emotion. For Sarah and Tom, it was like looking at a ghost brought to life, a living embodiment of their deepest pain and their most desperate hope. For Emily, it was a surreal, terrifying encounter with strangers who claimed to be her parents, people from a past she had no memory of. Sarah took a tentative step forward, her voice a fragile whisper. "Lily, Claire. Oh, my darling Lily Claire." Emily flinched at the name, her eyes darting to Martha. "My name is Emily," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The sound of her voice, mature and unfamiliar, was another blow to Sarah. It wasn't the baby's gurgle, the toddler's babbling. It was the voice of a young woman who had lived a lifetime without them. Tom stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion. "Lily, Claire, it's us, Mom and Dad." Emily looked at him, then at Sarah, her brow furrowed in confusion and fear. They were looking at her with such intense emotion, such a desperate longing, but she felt nothing. No spark of recognition, no echo of memory. These were strangers, kind-looking, heartbroken strangers, but strangers nonetheless. Martha Carter spoke, her voice tight with a mixture of protectiveness and guilt. "Emily, honey, these are the people who believe they are your birth parents. The DNA test confirmed." Her voice trailed off. Emily pulled away slightly, her gaze fixed on Sarah and Tom. Birth parents. The words felt foreign, disconnected from the reality of her life. George and Martha were her parents. They had raised her, loved her, been there for every scraped knee, every school play, every heart. Sarah's heart ached at Emily's hesitant response, the lack of recognition in her eyes. She had dreamed of this moment for 19 years, imagined a tearful reunion, a flood of forgotten memories. But reality was colder, harder. "We know this is a shock, sweetie," Sarah said gently, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "But we are. We're your parents. You were taken from us when you were just a baby." Emily shook her head, a flicker of panic in her eyes. No, that's not right. The Carters are my parents. They've always been my parents." She looked back at Martha and George, her anchor in this bewildering storm. The air in the room crackled with the tension between the two families, the two competing realities. On one side, the raw, enduring grief and fierce love of the biological parents. On the other, the protective, if complicated, bond of the adoptive parents and the confusion of the young woman caught in the middle. Vance watched from the corner, his expression somber. This was the human cost of the secrets he had uncovered. There were no easy answers here, no magical solutions. This was just the beginning of a long, painful, and uncertain journey. The moment of truth had arrived, but it brought with it not just answers, but a whole new set of heartbreaks and challenges. The two worlds had collided, and no one knew if they could ever truly merge. The world Emily had known, the solid ground beneath her feet, had simply dissolved. Sitting in the sterile police station room, the kind strangers claiming to be her parents, the quiet presence of the Carters behind her, the air thick with unspoken history. It was like being dropped into a movie where she didn't know the script. Lily Clare. The name echoed in her ears, foreign and unsettling. She was Emily, Emily Carter. She'd always been Emily. The DNA test. The detective had explained it, his voice calm and professional, but the words hadn't fully registered until the results came back. A match. A definitive, irrefutable match. The paper, with its scientific jargon and percentages, felt cold and impersonal, yet it held the power to rewrite her entire existence. Emily Carter was Lily Clare O'Connell. Disbelief was the first wave, a powerful denial that crashed over her, threatening to pull her under. It felt impossible. George and Martha Carter were her parents. They had the photos, the stories, the shared memories that stretched back as far as she could remember. The little handprint in plaster on the kitchen wall, the slightly crooked height marks on the pantry door frame, the bedtime stories read in Martha's soft voice, those were the anchors of her reality. And yet, the birthmark. She had always thought of it as just a part of her, a unique physical trait. But the intensity in Sarah O'Connell's eyes when she looked at it, the way her fingers had instinctively gone to her own face as if tracing a phantom mark, it was unsettling. It was a physical link to a past she didn't know, a past that these strangers claimed was hers. The police were careful, explaining the situation with a frustratingly neutral tone. A child abduction case from 19 years ago. A daycare worker who disappeared. A cold case reopened by a private investigator. And now, her. It was like a plot from a true crime podcast, except it was her life. Returning to the quiet familiarity of the Carters' farmhouse felt strange, tainted. The comfort was still there. The love, undeniable, but it was now layered with a complex, unsettling awareness. George and Martha were quieter than usual, their faces etched with a mixture of worry, sadness, and something else Emily couldn't quite decipher. Guilt. Fear. She didn't know how to talk to them about it, about the DNA, about Lily Clare, about the life they had built together, which now felt like it was floating on uncertain waters. Were they her parents? The test said no, but her heart, her history, said yes. The legal procedures began almost immediately. Lawyers were involved, discussions about custody, about identity, about the past. It felt clinical and cold, reducing her life to a series of forms and court dates. She was no longer just Emily, the girl from the diner. She was evidence, a subject of legal debate. The adaptation was the hardest part. How did you adapt to a potential new reality that invalidated your entire history? How did you reconcile the people who raised you with the people who grieved you? Sarah and Tom O'Connell were reaching out cautiously, wanting to talk, to share memories, to show her photos. Part of her was morbidly curious, a detached observer watching a drama unfold. Another part of her was terrified, afraid of what she might learn, afraid of the pain that lay buried beneath the surface of her seemingly ordinary life. She found herself staring at her reflection for long periods, examining the birthmark, tracing its outline with a tentative finger. Was this the key? Was this small splash of color the irrefutable proof of a stolen past? She looked into her own blue eyes, searching for any flicker of recognition, any echo of a baby named Lily Clare. But she saw only Emily, the young woman she had always been. Sleep offered little respite. Her dreams were a confusing jumble of familiar farmhouse scenes and unsettling, shadowy figures of a baby's cry that she couldn't place. She felt adrift, caught between two lives, two families, two names. The struggle for her past was just beginning. It wasn't a fight she had chosen, but one that had found her, pulling her from the quiet anonymity of her life and thrusting her into a spotlight she never wanted. She was Emily Carter, the girl from the mountains. She was Lily Clare O'Connell, the missing baby from Ohio, and she had no idea who she was supposed to be. The ground had given way, and she was free-falling into the unknown. The truth, when it finally emerged, was not a single clean answer, but a tangled knot of desperation, poor choices, and a twisted sense of love. Robert Vance, working with the local police and the now reinvestigated cold case file from Willow Creek, pieced together the puzzle. The fire in the isolated cabin had been the key. Forensic evidence, re-examined with new technology, revealed it wasn't just a tragic accident caused by a faulty stove. Traces of accelerant were found. The fire had been deliberately set. The property records for the land where the cabin stood led them not to John and Mary Doe, but to a name that resonated chillingly with the Willow Creek case. Pledger. The cabin had belonged to a distant branch of the Pledger family, connected to Gary Hemlock through his cousin, Susan Pledger. Gary Hemlock, the quiet, seemingly unassuming daycare worker who had vanished into thin air the day Lily Clare disappeared. The renewed investigation into his background, now with a clear link to a specific location and family, yielded more details. Gary wasn't just transient, he had a history of instability, minor brushes with the law related to desperation and petty theft. He also had a connection to the Pledger family in the mountains, a connection that ran deeper than a distant cousin. His mother, it turned out, was a Pledger, though she had married and moved away, losing touch with some of her relatives. Gary had reconnected with some of them shortly before taking the job at Little Saplings. His motive, pieced together from fragmented witness statements, his own sparse history, and eventually a reluctant confession from Martha Carter, was born of a desperate, misguided desire for family. Gary had grown up feeling rootless, abandoned. He had fixated on the idea of having a child, a family of his own, but his life was in shambles. He saw Lily Clare at the daycare, a beautiful, seemingly happy baby, and an unthinkable plan began to form. He knew the Carters, distantly, through his mother's side of the family. He knew they longed for a child, having suffered miscarriages years prior. The fire, Martha finally admitted, had been a tragic accident, but not in the way they had initially claimed. It had happened shortly after Gary arrived at the Pledger cabin with a baby he claimed was orphaned and abandoned. The people who died in the fire weren't the baby's parents, but two other distant relatives who had been staying at the cabin. Gary, in a panic after the fire, seeing an opportunity to disappear and provide the baby with a seemingly stable home, had approached the Carters. He spun a fabricated tale of the baby being orphaned by the fire, knowing the Carters' compassionate nature and their desire for a child. He played on their religious beliefs, presenting the baby as a gift, a child in need of a loving home. He convinced them to take her in to keep her presence quiet, fearing she would be placed in the foster care system if discovered. He promised to provide them with legal documentation later, documentation that, of course, never materialized. He then vanished, presumably to escape any connection to the fire and the abduction. The Carters, blinded by their desire for a child and perhaps intimidated by Gary's desperation and the unusual circumstances, agreed. They convinced themselves they were doing the right thing, providing a loving home for a child who had nowhere else to go. Their secret had been their burden for 19 years. They had raised Emily as their own, showered her with love, built a life around her. They had justified their actions, rationalized the deception, buried the truth deep within their hearts. The revelation hit Emily like a physical blow. Her life, the comfortable, familiar narrative she had always believed, was a lie. The Carters, the people she had loved and trusted implicitly, had built their family on a foundation of deception, on the theft of a baby from her grieving parents. The love felt real, the memories cherished, but they were now tainted by the knowledge of how she had come to them. The impact on all three families was immense and complex. For Sarah and Tom, the truth brought a painful clarity, the answers they had craved for so long. But it also brought the devastating realization that their daughter had been raised by others, that she had a lifetime of memories that didn't include them. The joy of finding her was tempered by the heartbreaking reality of their lost years and the stranger she had become. For the Carters, the exposure brought shame, legal consequences for their complicity in concealing the truth, and the potential loss of the daughter they had raised. Their motives, however misguided, had stemmed from a desire for family, but their actions had caused unimaginable pain. For Emily, it was an earthquake that fractured her identity. She was loved by two sets of parents, both with legitimate yet complicated claims. She grieved the loss of the simple, uncomplicated life she had known, the betrayal of the secret the Carters had kept. She had a biological past she didn't remember, and an adoptive present that was now under scrutiny. She was Emily, and she was Lily Clare, and she had to figure out who she was and who she wanted to be in the wreckage of the truth. The cards were all on the table, raw and unforgiving, and the game of rebuilding their lives had just begun. The quiet life of Willow Creek, Ohio, and the secluded community in the Blue Ridge Mountains were abruptly thrust into the national spotlight. The story of Lily Clare O'Connell, the baby abducted nearly 2 decades ago, found alive as Emily Carter, was tailor-made for headlines. It was a tale of a parent's enduring grief, a detective's relentless pursuit, and a shocking deception hidden for years. The legal consequences for George and Martha Carter were swift and unavoidable. While they hadn't been involved in the initial abduction, their actions in concealing Emily's true identity and failing to report her presence to the authorities constituted serious offenses. They were arrested and charged with obstruction of justice and interference with custody. The small town was stunned. The Carters, pillars of their church and respected members of the community, were now facing prison time. Their mugshots, looking bewildered and heartbroken, were a stark contrast to the smiling photos of Emily that accompanied the news stories. Their defense hinged on their claim that they genuinely believed they were saving an orphaned child, that Gary Hemlock had manipulated them, preying on their desire for a family. Their lawyers argued that their actions, while illegal, were born out of a misguided sense of compassion, not malice towards the O'Connells. The prosecution, however, painted a picture of a deliberate cover-up, a choice to keep a missing child from her rightful parents for personal gain. The legal battle was wrenching, exposing the complex moral landscape of the case and dividing opinions even within their own community. Gary Hemlock, the man who had set the entire tragedy in motion, remained at large. The renewed search for him was intense, his face splashed across every news channel. The theory was that he had either died in the cabin fire, though there had been no identifiable remains matching him, or had successfully disappeared, perhaps assuming a new identity. The Pledger family in the mountains were questioned extensively, their lives scrutinized, but they maintained they had lost contact with Gary years ago and had no knowledge of his actions or his whereabouts. The brief encounter Sarah had with Brand Pledger at the tavern remained a chilling, unresolved footnote, a reminder of the close proximity of the darkness that had touched her life. The media descended on both Willow Creek and the mountain town like a swarm. Reporters camped outside the O'Connells' house, the Carters' farm, and the police stations. Sarah and Tom, raw with emotion, gave carefully managed interviews, sharing their 19-year nightmare and their tentative, fragile hope for the future. Emily, overwhelmed and besieged, retreated from the public eye, seeking refuge from the camera flashes and intrusive questions. Social media exploded. Find Lily Claire hashtags trended again, but this time they were accompanied by a storm of commentary, speculation, and judgment. Opinions on the Carters were sharply divided. Some condemned them as kidnappers, stealing a child's life. Others, particularly those from their own community, defended them, portraying them as victims of a con man, a kind couple who had made a terrible mistake. Emily herself became a subject of intense public scrutiny and debate. Her face, once a symbol of hope, now a focal point for discussions about nature versus nurture, the definition of family, and the ethics of the case. The O'Connells received an outpouring of sympathy and support, but also intrusive questions and unwanted advice. The Carters faced ostracism and condemnation, their lives irrevocably changed by the exposure of their secret. The small, close-knit communities where both families lived struggled to process the enormity of the events, grappling with the presence of national media and the uncomfortable reality that such a dark secret could exist in their midst. The legal proceedings against the Carters ground on a painful public spectacle. The outcome would determine not just their fate, but also have a profound impact on Emily's future and her relationship with the people who had raised her. The truth had been revealed, but the consequences were still unfolding, a complex web of legal battles, emotional fallout, and the relentless, unforgiving glare of the public eye. The reckoning had arrived, and its impact would be felt for years to come. The first few months were a blur of awkward phone calls, stilted video chats, and visits that felt more like carefully orchestrated performances than genuine reunions. Emily was caught in the middle, a human bridge spanning the vast 19-year chasm between the O'Connells and the remnants of her life with the Carters. Sarah and Tom were navigating their own complex emotions. The initial euphoria of finding Lily Claire had given way to the daunting reality of building a relationship with a young woman who was, in many ways, a stranger. They longed to share every missed moment, every forgotten memory, to fill the void of 19 years with a lifetime of parental love. But they also understood, intellectually if not emotionally, that Emily had a history, attachments, a sense of self that was separate from their longing. Their attempts to connect were often clumsy, weighted down by the unspoken history. Sarah would share baby photos, pointing out similarities, recounting anecdotes about Lily Claire's first steps, her favorite toy. Emily would listen patiently, a polite smile on her face, but inside she felt a disconnect. These stories, these memories, felt like they belonged to someone else, a ghost of a baby she didn't know. The birthmark was the only tangible link, a physical reminder of a past that felt both deeply personal and utterly foreign. Tom, quieter than Sarah, struggled to express the depth of his suppressed grief and newfound hope. He watched Emily with a gentle, yearning gaze, trying to find traces of the baby he had lost in the young woman before him. He talked about his life, his work as a history teacher, hoping to find common ground, but the conversations often felt forced, punctuated by long, uncomfortable silences. Emily, meanwhile, was grappling with a profound identity crisis. She was Emily Carter, forged in the quiet rhythms of mountain life, shaped by the love and values of the people who had raised her. She was also Lily Claire O'Connell, the stolen baby, the symbol of a family's enduring pain. The two identities warred within her, leaving her feeling fragmented and lost. The trauma of the revelation, the betrayal of the Carters' secret, cast a long shadow. She questioned everything she had ever believed about her life, about the people she had trusted. The love she felt for the Carters was still there, a deep-rooted affection that couldn't be easily severed, but it was now tangled with anger, hurt, and a profound sense of disorientation. They had loved her, yes, but they had also lied to her, built their happiness on a foundation of someone else's heartbreak. Integrating into the O'Connells' lives felt like trying to force two incompatible puzzle pieces together. Their home in Willow Creek, with its manicured lawn and suburban predictability, was a world away from the rugged beauty and close-knit community of the mountains. She felt like an outsider, constantly aware of the history she didn't share, the inside jokes she didn't understand, the family references that meant nothing to her. She tried to find a balance to honor both her past and her present. She kept in touch with the Carters, visiting them, under legal supervision initially, as they navigated their own legal consequences and the fallout in their community. Their remorse seemed genuine, their love for her unwavering, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. She also spent more time in Willow Creek, trying to build a connection with Sarah and Tom. They visited the library where Sarah worked, the park where Lily Clare had played, the places that held the echoes of the life that was stolen. These visits were emotionally draining, stirring up feelings of sadness and confusion. She saw the pain in her biological parents' eyes, felt the weight of their 19-year loss, and it added another layer to her already heavy burden. The simple life she had known was gone, replaced by a complex, messy reality. She longed for the anonymity of the diner, the easy camaraderie with her friends, the comforting familiarity of the mountain air. But she couldn't go back. Her identity had been fractured, her past irrevocably altered. She was a product of two vastly different worlds, carrying the weight of a history she didn't remember, but that had shaped everything she was. The path forward was uncertain, a narrow ridge between two precipices. Finding a way to build a new reality, one that somehow integrated the fragments of her past and present, was the greatest challenge she had ever faced. The trauma had left its mark, not just in the physical birthmark she carried, but in the deep, invisible scars on her soul. Years passed, not in a blur, but in a series of moments, each one a fragile step forward on ground that still felt, at times, unsteady. The public clamor faded, the headlines moved on, but the echoes of the truth lingered, a low hum beneath the surface of their lives. For Sarah and Tom, the raw, clawing grief had transformed into a quieter, more persistent ache, a permanent resident in their hearts. But now, finally, it was accompanied by a fragile, ever-strengthening thread of connection to the daughter they had found. The visits weren't always easy. There were still silences that felt too heavy, moments of shared history where Sarah or Tom would speak of a memory, a person, a place from Lily Clare's first 2 years, and Emily's polite, sometimes distant response would be a stark reminder of the life she hadn't lived with them. Sarah had to constantly remind herself to breathe, to manage the surge of longing that threatened to overwhelm her, the desperate desire to scoop Emily up and somehow transport them both back to that sunlit living room, to erase the 19 years of separation. Do you remember anything at all?" Sarah asked one afternoon, her voice barely a whisper, as they looked through a photo album filled with blurry snapshots of a baby, Lily Clare. Emily, sitting beside her on the sofa in Willow Creek, the familiar scent of the O'Connells' home now a little less foreign, shook her head slowly. "No," she said, her voice soft. It's like looking at a different person. I know it's me, the test, but I don't feel it. Not yet." A flicker of pain crossed her face, a reflection of the internal struggle that was her constant companion. Is that awful?" "No, sweetie, it's not awful," Tom said, his voice rough with emotion as he reached out and covered Emily's hand with his own. It's understandable. You have your own memories, your own life." He squeezed her hand gently. We missed you so much." That raw, open vulnerability from Tom, the man who had often retreated into silence, chipped away at some of Emily's own defenses. She saw not just the parents who had lost a child, but two people who were navigating their own profound pain and trying, with awkward, heartbreaking sincerity, to connect with the stranger their daughter had become. She started sharing more about her life in the mountains, the little details that made up her world, the smell of rain on pine needles, the taste of Martha's apple pie, the way the light hit the mountains at sunset. Sarah and Tom listened intently, soaking up every word, trying to build a picture of the young woman Emily had become. They learned about her love for old books, a trait that made Sarah smile, a genetic echo across the years, her quiet determination, her unexpected talent for fixing things, a trait that reminded Tom of his own father. Emily also began to explore the parts of her that were Lily Clare. She visited the library where Sarah had worked, walking the aisles, breathing in the scent of paper, trying to imagine her mother here, living a life shaped by the longing for her. She stood by the window in the children's section, watching mothers read to their little ones, a bittersweet ache in her chest. She wasn't just Emily Carter, she was also the baby who had been loved fiercely, who had been mourned for 19 years. Acknowledging Lily Clare wasn't about erasing Emily, but about integrating the lost parts of herself, about understanding the complete story of her becoming. The relationship with the Carters remained a delicate balance. The anger and betrayal lingered, a quiet tension beneath the surface. But the love, the foundation of her childhood, was still there. Seeing Martha and George navigate the consequences of their actions, the visible weight of their regret, allowed a fragile space for forgiveness to begin to bloom. It wasn't about condoning what they had done, but about acknowledging the complex humanity of their choices and the love they had undeniably shown her. Years weren't a magic wand, but they did provide perspective. The intensity of the immediate aftermath softened. The media moved on. The legal proceedings became a matter of public record, not daily headlines. Sarah and Tom found a renewed sense of purpose, dedicating time and resources to helping other families of missing children. Their shared experience, once a source of division, became a foundation for a deeper, more empathetic connection. Emily, graduating from college, chose a career path that allowed her to work with young people, her own journey giving her a profound understanding of the complexities of identity and belonging. She didn't talk about her past openly, but it informed her empathy, her quiet strength. The birthmark, the unique lotus blossom, was no longer the central character in her story. It was simply a part of her, a beautiful, subtle detail that hinted at a history known only to those closest to her. When she looked in the mirror now, she saw not just Emily Carter or Lily Clare O'Connell, but a woman who carried the love of two families, the resilience of a survivor, and the quiet wisdom gained from navigating a life built on a fault line. On the evening of her 30th birthday, a warm spring night, Emily sat on the porch of her own small house, a place she had bought with money saved from years of hard work. Sarah and Tom were there, along with a few close friends from both her mountain past and her newer life. The air was filled with the scent of blooming honeysuckle and the gentle murmur of a conversation. Tom raised a glass. "To Emily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Our daughter, you are everything we could have ever hoped for, and so much more." Sarah's eyes, bright with unshed tears, met Emily's. There was no need for grand pronouncements, for attempts to recapture lost time. In their gaze was a depth of love and acceptance that transcended the 19 years of separation. Emily smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her face, touching the edge of the lotus blossom birthmark. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice full of a quiet peace that had taken years to find. She looked at Sarah and Tom, at the friends who had become her chosen family, at the life she had built from the fragments of her past. It wasn't the life anyone had planned. It was messy, complicated, and bore the indelible marks of loss and trauma. But it was hers, and it was filled with love, hard-won understanding, and a fragile, beautiful hope for the unwritten pages that lay ahead. The silence that had screamed for so long had finally given way to the quiet, enduring melody of becoming. Share your opinion in the comments. Like and subscribe to the channel.